Today, we're diving deep into the Al-Sweady Inquiry. This was a massive, 5-year, multi-million-pound investigation into one of the most controversial battles of the Iraq War. It was all about finding the truth in the fog of war, and it kicked off with an unbelievably serious accusation. So, here's the core claim, and it's an explosive one, that after a brutal firefight, British soldiers took Iraqi prisoners back to their base, a place called Camp Abu Naji, and murdered them. We're talking about a war crime allegation, and it was so serious that it triggered one of the largest public inquiries in British history. Okay, so to even begin to understand these allegations, we have to rewind. We've got to go back to the battle itself, which was a completely chaotic and violent firefight that just erupted on May 14, 2004. Right, this map helps us get our bearings. You can see the main British base, Camp Abu Naji, right up there in the north. The action, though, it all takes place south of there, along a big highway called Route 6, near a checkpoint the soldiers called Danny Boy. Now, you really have to notice how fast this all went down. At 4:36 in the afternoon, a small British patrol leaves their camp. Just 11 minutes later, that's it, 11 minutes, they're ambushed. And within half an hour, the road is being described as lined with armed men. This wasn't some minor skirmish, this was a full-blown battle. And this wasn't just a random encounter. The inquiry was very clear on this. They concluded that the insurgents, who were linked to a powerful militia called the Mahdi Army, had deliberately armed themselves and set up strategic fighting positions. This was a planned, coordinated attack from the get-go. So the shooting stops. But in a lot of ways, the harder fight was just beginning. The fight for the facts. The inquiry had to somehow cut through all these conflicting stories and focus on cold, hard evidence. And some of that evidence, well, it wouldn't even surface for years. Which brings us to a really crucial piece of the puzzle, something called the OMS detaining list. Now, this document came from an organization that was actually linked to the very militia the British were fighting. And here's the crazy part. It was handed over to lawyers almost by accident, years after the battle. And this is where it gets so important. You see, the detainees had all claimed they were just innocent civilians, farmers, shepherds, people caught in the crossfire. But this list, a document from their own side, identified all 9 of them by name and linked them directly to Mahdi army platoons. For the inquiry, this was just damning evidence that they were actually militia fighters. And it wasn't just the paperwork. The physical evidence from the battlefield told a very similar story. I mean, we're not talking about just a couple of rifles here. Soldiers recovered a pretty significant cache of weapons and military-style chest webbing. This photo really gives you a sense of the intensity of the fight. The insurgents weren't just using small arms. Look at this. They had heavy weaponry like rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, which are more than powerful enough to take out an armored vehicle. So what was the final count? 31. In total, on the evening of the battle, military police logged 31 separate captured weapons. The evidence was just overwhelmingly pointing to the Iraqis being well-armed, organized combatants, not civilians. So now we get to the testimonies. And this is where the inquiry basically had to stare down to completely different versions of reality. The story told by the Iraqi detainees and the one told by the British soldiers. Let me give you a perfect example. Detainee 776 gave this very specific, very vivid account of being kicked in the head by a black soldier. The problem? The inquiry checked. And it turned out there was only one black soldier anywhere near the battle, and he was in a totally different spot, with zero involvement in this man's capture. The inquiry's conclusion? It was a deliberate lie. And if that wasn't clear enough, check this one out. It's even more direct. A different detainee claimed that soldiers stole $200 from him. But when he was under oath, he admitted he just made it up. His explicit goal, in his own words, was to defame the British forces. And look, these weren't just isolated incidents. The inquiry found a consistent pattern running through almost all the detainees' testimonies. You had stories that changed over time, flat-out contradictions, and claims that were just completely disproven by the physical evidence. So, after 5 years, thousands and thousands of documents, and hundreds of witnesses, what was the final verdict? What did this monumental investigation actually conclude? This right here is probably the most stunning moment in the entire process. After all those years of fighting it out, the lawyers for the Iraqi families formally withdrew the central allegation. They just conceded. They said they would no longer claim that prisoners were taken back to Camp Abu Naji and murdered. And the inquiry's final report, well, it was unequivocal. It found that the most serious allegations of unlawful killing, of torture, of mutilation at the British camp were, and I'm quoting directly here, wholly without foundation, and were based on deliberate lies. But, and this is an important but, the inquiry did not give the British military a completely clean slate. It found clear evidence of mistreatment. For instance, soldiers taking so-called trophy photos of detainees, a practice the Ministry of Defense itself had to accept was, at the very least, inappropriate. Ultimately, the Al-Sweady Inquiry just shows you the incredible, almost impossible difficulty of piecing the truth back together after the smoke of battle has cleared. And it leaves all of us with a really critical question. In the fog of war, how can we ever really separate the fabrication from the facts to understand what truly happened?